Well, good morning, Dr. Michael Fisher and Dr. Jon Amundson. We're in a conversation on careers of folly and wisdom, and that combination happens to be very appealing and, if not ironic, if not opposites, actually may be the same thing, folly and wisdom, coming
Yeah,
down the same pipe. Good morning, John.
yeah. Good morning to you. How are you? Yeah.
I'm doing good here, and I'm in
And a
Vancouver.
dozen quotes run through my head around this idea of folly and wisdom.
Go
Yeah.
for it. Which ones you got on top?
Well, there's a Persian one that I love, and it says, well, of course, true wisdom will always look like folly to the eyes of the world. How could it be true wisdom if it did not appear that way to the majority? Yeah, yeah. So I love that quote. Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we decided to enter this conversation. I'll just intro a little bit you, John, and how I came to know you a bit. And
Please.
that actually goes back to probably about 1987, I believe, would be when you could probably look in your files at your office
Yeah.
of psychology, and you would probably find my name there because I was a client of yours for a short while there.
Mhm.
And then eventually I ended up going into doing counseling services for youth in a care facility out west of Calgary. And you ended up being one of my supervisors for a particular client or two, I think, that we had.
Mhm.
So
Mhm. Mhm.
that ended in about the early 90s, our relationship at that time. And then I just went my way, you went your way of what you were doing. And I basically came to come back only in the last year or two and say, I really want to do a book on Jon Amundson and his psychological practice and his wildlife on the waves and in the boats and in
Yeah.
all the ways that you travel in the world.
Yeah.
And this is where we're kind of going. I just want to say that this morning is really interesting. I was thinking about, okay, I've interviewed a lot of people, and to me, John, it represents someone who's been able to straddle the world of this creative, wild, mystic, karate expert, everything.
Yeah.
And then he brings it into this very practical, everyday client after client after client as a very successful psychologist, psychotherapist in Calgary. And I know you're well known across the psychological associations across Canada.
Yeah.
So back to way back, we relate and we thought we'd just start in with, I'm going to start with a question I'm going to ask you as if I was interviewing you. And it's one that came the other day, and it's a simple Fisher
Please. Yeah.
questionnaire, kind of like the John Colbert questionnaire he gives to all his people that come
Yeah.
on his show. And here it is.
Please.
I got three of them.
Yeah.
Oh, the question is, John, how do you best like to make another smile?
That's my, yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Let me give a little history of my sense of smile. Um, there was a study that demonstrated that people who were not theists or were not people of spirit, particularly, often knew more about the Bible than those who were fundamentalists. See, see. So I've always made that one of my practices is to understand in the broadest possible sense the way others make sense of their lives. And so my comment has been the closest I come to believing in God is when I see a smile on another human being's face. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. To awaken the deepest faith I have. Yeah. So that's always been my thing is that I'll pair it with another concept before I go on, because in the work that we do as clinicians, our goal is often only to make people a little less sad or a little less scared. That's the predominant amount of work. And the research is showing that two-thirds to 80% of the people that present for treatment, voluntary treatment especially, are suffering anxiety or depression. That's what they come in for. See, there are, I mean, obviously there's a whole other catchment. There's court ordered folks. There are people that have disordered thought. There are people that are hospitalized and on and on. But the people that are mostly coming in for treatment. So I've always just said my career has been just helping people be a little less sad or a little less scared. So in my interactions with others in the world, the kind of methods you can employ that lots of places, say walking along, talking to people in the park, whatever it is, right? And so my connection then with that wonderful feeling that some people call God is when I see people smile.
Very interesting. You know,
Yeah,
John, that you were here visiting.
yeah.
You're with your lovely dog. What's your dog's name?
Isabella,
Isabella, lovely.
perché cane corso del refugio. She was a rescue dog out of a shelter. I don't like to use the word rescue, it's too self-promoting, but I like to say a shelter dog. And she'd been astray, and she so I gave her an Italian name, perché cane italiana. She's an Italian dog. Yeah.
Giganticus, I would add.
Yeah, 135 pounds. Michael saw this dog.
Yeah,
I said, "Hi, Michael, I'm here." And he goes, "Duh, whoa, whoa,
yeah.
slow down."
Got to deal with the dog first, and then we
Yeah,
walked down to the restaurant down the harbor here, and
yeah,
had
yeah,
a nice lunch and chat. Again, we hadn't seen each other in person for
yeah,
literally
years.
40 years. I
Yeah,
mean, this at least.
yeah.
And so fascinating to just kind of catching up. Then we were walking back, John, and you may or may not remember, we're about halfway back to my house. We're on the street, and we're across the crosswalk halfway, just chatting away, and suddenly you turn
Mhm,
right in the middle of the street. You
mhm,
turn and you see an old lady,
mhm,
elder, quite elder, with a
mhm,
walker,
mhm,
struggling to go up quite a steep hill on the sidewalk.
mhm.
You turn around immediately. Go right in toward her and you start her up in a conversation. Do you remember what you said to her? Do you remember it all?
Yeah, well, I don't remember, but usually in those situations, I'll say, it depends. I'll say, and I'm using this term colloquially, and I'm using it to deconstruct the very principle that it often is about. I'll say, "Girl, you're moving pretty good, but if you need any help, let me give you a hand," or something like that,
Right,
or
right,
like you tell me if you need anything,
right.
as opposed to, "Oh, let me help you." I don't like that. There's a condescension, and it takes away the autonomy of the individual. It's an invasive. So I would say something like, I don't remember. What did I say? Do you
I
remember?
don't remember
Yeah.
because it was a little behind me and I was a little in shock, and I'll tell you why I was in a little bit of shock. You
Yeah.
don't know, I know that person.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
She lives in our apartment
Oh, oh.
time. And in fact,
Yeah.
she was the one
Mhm.
that got us into this apartment at the
Oh,
time.
oh, oh, oh.
And as it turned out, horrible end after a year relationship, a wonderful relationship with her.
Oh,
She's
good.
like 89 years old
Oh
and
my
she's
God. Yeah.
really well read. She reads
Hmm.
young backwards and forwards,
Yeah, yeah.
has this amazing life.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
but there were some things that she's known to destroy a lot of relationships in the building, which
Yeah, don't turn your
we
back
only
on
found
her.
out after.
Yeah, don't turn your back on her. Yeah.
Yes. So, but when you
Hmm.
went up to her, I
Yeah.
think I remember
Hmm.
watching at least her
Hmm.
face. The reason I caught her eye particularly
Hmm.
and saw you going is because she saw me and
Hmm.
I'm in the enemy camp and she
Oh.
went very sour.
Hmm.
Now,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
told me when I turned around and saw this woman, her face looked really troubled.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And you responded
Hmm.
and zoomed over, and you
Hmm.
actually did brighten up her day by far. I was watching. She loves
Yeah.
to talk, she loves to engage people,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you did so. So I just thought it was a
Hmm.
very
Hmm.
curious and interesting when we talked about smile.
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
brought out the spirit, and I think with my relationship with her, I also brought out a spirit. Like she just loved me. She said, "Oh, I can talk to you. I can't talk to people about this kind of deep stuff."
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in the end, I
Hmm.
saw things collapsing, and other sides come out, and all of a sudden
Hmm.
she can't stand my wife, and all of a sudden she's trying to get me, and and it just went bad. So
Yeah, the problem with aging is it depends how you lived your life. There's an old saying, you have a choice in your life. You can be childlike or childish, right? And as people age, when there has been sort of lots of things where they feel shoulda, coulda, might have, all that kind of stuff, then there can become this sort of negativity. But people will always strive for some sense of appreciative presence. And so people can have an appreciative presence through being a bit sour. Like I used to say, it's called the old man barbershop effect. If you want to see it, you go to a barbershop that takes care of elder men. And while they're in those chairs, they'll pontificate of the problem with this government. I'll relate a story. I was sitting in a barber chair and happened to be an old, just was convenient, but a lot of elders came in. And the man cutting my hair was actually a Greek from Greece, but he lived in Venezuela. So he and I would speak Spanish to each other. Next to him was an Italian, a person from Italy. So I would speak to him in Italian. We'd talk back and forth, right? And the man, the Italian guy was cutting his hair, and he says, "You know what this country is all these immigrants or something like that, right?" And I said, "I'm an immigrant because I came up here in 75, finished my obligations under selective service, then came to Canada." And I said, "Well, I'm an immigrant." And he said, "Well, they just take our money." And I said, "Don't answer this question, but how much taxes did you pay each year?" And I could almost guarantee that I paid more, see, as an immigrant, see. And then he pauses, and I even said, "The guy cutting your hair is a new Canadian, the man cutting mine." And then he said, "Well, I don't mean these kind of people." And I said, so it's racism we're talking about." And then the Greek, the Italian guy went, "Shut up. You're going to ruin my tip." So I did shut up,
Yeah.
but you follow. See. And so what I talk about is the old man barbershop phenomenon, where we're trying to have an agentic presence in the world. We become, you know what? Those young people, or we become contrarian, and it has less to do with the substance of an issue or reflective consideration than the feeling of, "I'm old, I'm disappearing, I'm disappearing, I'm disappearing." And I want you to see me. I want you to listen to me. I want to have an impact. So again, I'm not speaking of particulars with your elderly woman in the building, but it can very well be that. Can very well be her attempting to continue to have a presence. "Who left this trash on the stairwell?" Or, "Are you went through the door and you didn't even consider someone else?" Those kinds of little things.
John, you trained and have trained probably hundreds, if not
Yeah,
thousands, of young psychologists, psychotherapists, social
yeah,
workers,
yeah,
perhaps.
yeah.
And what percent do you think really grok what you just said? Is
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
below
Hmm.
the content, below that acting,
Yeah.
it's not just recognizing the symptom is not necessarily the problem, but it actually grok that no, actually somebody is attempting to have agentic presence. And
Yeah.
how do you come to that? Like,
Hmm.
what kind of
Hmm.
space do you give that?
Hmm.
And for how long do you give that
Yeah.
without thinking you have to solve the problem of what they're presenting is? How
Hmm.
many grok, what
Yeah.
percentage do you
Yeah.
think all those
Well, yeah. Now I'm going to reframe the question a little bit, because Gandhi once said, "Well, God will come to starving people in the form of bread," meaning the awakening and being present, grokking, so to speak, is around bread initially. So I kind of take that approach and say, if I'm effective, I'll be able to interact with them at the level they're at without nominating the level they're at as being any sort of final solution. See, that I'll be able to relate in a way that they'll say, "Oh, that makes so much sense. Oh, yes, it's coming together." Because I would say in supervision or training, which is what you're framing this as, we can either get too far behind or too far ahead. See, we can be entertaining ourselves because all these wonderful thoughts are awakening in our head, and they don't grok. They don't. Piaget talked about assimilation and accommodation, and you can't take something in that doesn't have a hook to hang it on, so to speak. Right? Margaret Mead, when she was in the South Pacific, she said the missionaries came and they introduced dress because you have to have clothes on. You've got to have clothes. But clothes were also enmeshed in an accommodation of cleanliness. The people were incredibly clean before because they were in and out of the ocean, and they didn't wear many clothes. All of a sudden now they're wearing a muumuu, and the idea of accommodating cleanliness that existed. So then people say, "Well, look at these wretched people." They weren't wretched at all. The introduction of something that was not, they couldn't accommodate. Okay? So I kind of look at it that way. So when I'm going forward, I have to kind of see where are they at? What does this mean to them? You know, are they expansive? Are they divergent in their thinking? Are they convergent? See, because that's just one set of differentiation. Divergent people are able to go yes, 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 and the the dark side of divergence is people become so enamored with so many ways to see the world that to be everywhere is to be nowhere. And then the convergent ones become so committed to lining things up and arranging things as they see it and think it has to be, that it's very hard for them to reflectively question the 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 integrity, the usefulness of their perspective. So often when I'm talking like this with you, I did a presentation for some first responders, and the guy I presented with said, that was wonderful. It was so great. I kind of think they would have given me about a C because they were people that every day deal with very practical problems. And my message to them, they said, we want methods to deal with self-care. And my definition of self-care is anything that brings you joy. And I can't tell you what that is. I mean, eat more vegetables, drink more water, go for a run, get some new friends, meditate, have a hobby. I don't know if that's going to bring you joy. The philosopher Slavoj Žižek, he once said, in my country, he's a Slovenian, and he has a funny accent. I'm not going to try to do it.
I love it. Yeah.
But yeah, but he talks kind of with a slurring kind of quality of speech. I want to be, I'm not appropriated. I want to appreciate it. But he says, in my country, people ride this thing up a hill and they slide down on skis and they repeat it over and over. I don't get it. I don't get it. Why not just sit at the bottom and read a good book? See, that's his joy. See? See? So it's the idea of what is it that brings you joy. And I kept trying to amplify that point, and I'm just convinced that it didn't really grok with them.
Yeah.
They wanted to say, you should do this. Here's what you have to do. See?
Yeah, and then the Health Canada or somebody comes down with you have to have this, and this to be healthy, and then you'll be normal and all those wonderful things.
Well, that has been my thing with our college. Our college has said every year you must now do self-care. It's part of the re-registration requirements. And I said, well, the medium is the message. So as soon as you say you must do this, it's no longer self-care. It's another thing on our list of should, must, ought, have to, got to. See? And self-care are things that are outside of that. It's not listed there. I do it because it's a joyful, wonderful thing that I do spontaneously or freely. And so I gave the college a really hard time about that.
Oh,
You know,
good.
yeah. And actually, it wasn't based on just my input, but lots of input because they said you will list the things you have done. And boy, did I have a holiday listing my stuff. I went at them and listed all sorts of things, right? And then people said it's none of their business what I do. Why do I have to tell them? I went to a hot spring retreat. I mean, whatever. See. So then they said, okay, we'll just tell you have to do it, but you don't have to list anything. Yeah. And again, a lot of those folks were more concerned about this idea of their personal privacy and their personal right to have that part of their life their own, as opposed to having to make a declaration on a form. But
Yeah.
I didn't care about the form so much, but I just thought you can't prescribe this stuff.
Yeah, nicely
Yeah.
put. Nicely put.
Yeah.
Okay, next question.
Yeah, please.
How do you like wisdom to be shared with you?
Mhm. Yeah, there's a Zen parable, and it says there's three kinds of teachers. The first one teaches by going no, 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 no. The second one teaches by no, yes, no, yes, no, yes. The last one, all of a sudden you realize you've acquired something, you're not quite sure how you got it. That's the true wisdom teaching, that it takes place outside of any particular directive. So there may be directives involved, but all of a sudden the person, has it. Many years ago, a friend of my son, he just finished. I think he had 6 years or something, and he was serving in Drumheller, and he got out. A Vietnamese young man, and and he always wanted to go fly fishing. So I took him up to a place called the Livingstone, which is a stream in southwestern Alberta. And it's just a really beautiful place, quite isolated, well, relatively isolated. So I took him there and we fished up and down and showed him, boom, boom, put the right fly and away he went. And his line at the end of the day that made me feel really, really good, he said, well, that was good, but I want to catch big fish. Because these were, we're not talking, but he was thinking, they're good cutthroat. They're an Eastern Slope
Yeah,
cutthroat, and a
yeah.
big one would be like that. And he'd caught fish. And I didn't say it, but in my head, I said, if you'd have gone by yourself, you wouldn't have caught any fish. Meaning, I just sort of imparted to him ways to manage the water that led him to believe that look at me, I'm big fish now. So yeah, that's the best kind of teaching, and that's where wisdom gets imparted. Okay?
Well, I was just thinking that what comes up for me is this trend that's gone on at least 10 years, maybe
Mhm,
20. Um, Pretty disturbing to me as someone. I give a lot of workshops, and when you try to market workshops, and people in the proposal say, well,
mhm,
tell us what our takeaway is going to be.
mhm,
Tell us what the
mhm,
takeaway is going to be.
mhm, mhm,
And I
mhm,
always
mhm,
refuse to do this,
mhm,
of course, and that's why you don't get a lot of gigs.
mhm,
But the reality is, it seems very similar to what you're just describing in that story. It's like, if I take you to the river, I give you this really interesting experience that I think is worthy, that I'm bringing my expertise to. You're
mhm,
getting likely some benefit, no doubt. I wouldn't be probably teaching if you weren't getting
mhm,
something. But
mhm,
the big takeaway is they want the big fish, and I think a takeaway is what do you think has happened in this takeaway world that is going on
mhm,
right now? And certainly it's hit
mhm, mhm.
psychology, wellness, all those.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we are a kind of a, a, a fast food culture, a fast food culture, and so um, uh, people want to have things very quick, not necessarily super nourishing, but will get them through. Also, Jung said, and you'll probably hear me say this more than once today. Jung said, "Well, of course, people judge. Thinking is hard work." See, the idea of being reflective takes more effort. So I just judge. So I want to tell me what will give me something in a judgmenty way. I do the gym. I go to the gym because it's self-care. I'm supposed to do this, right? See, they will get into that. So I do believe that there's a velocity that people want to get around, and but we if we propose to have any ability to be in the world and be useful, we just don't bemoan that. We just understand it. See, we describe it and we understand it, and then we find where the seams are and the edges are, where we can make whatever small difference we can in whatever way with that, whatever that sense of urgency. And again, you hear me out, should, must, ought, gotta, have to, what, when, where, why, all that kind of velocity. And then we find our place in that. We find a way to manage it. And as you say, people go to workshops in the same way they go to McDonald's, right? I want to see, why do people keep going back to McDonald's? Not good for you for sure, but it's quite satisfying. It's quite, whatever you get, it's a satisfying sort of experience. So there is in many of the training and the consultations, there is that desire. And the ones that do that well, they come up with a shtick and they have a model and they go about that. And then they kind of hang with that until such time as the next best thing to replace the last best thing comes along, right?
Yeah.
And that's the nature of our business, mental health. It's just wonderful to watch how now it's this and now it's that, and here's, all the things. And again, to extend it into the profession, there has been a kind of a technicalizing of the profession, and more. I've taken a position with our college. I think I'm still on good terms with them, in the sense that I try to promote only like good trouble, but they put standards and guidelines, and they list them in that way. They'll say, "Here's the law. Here's what you should do." And when talking with the powers that be, they say, "Well, our membership likes that," and I said, "Of course they like it, because then they don't have to deal with professional judgment. I mean, professional thinking, rather professional judgment, not more mundane judgment. Okay? They'll say, oh, I just won't do this. There's been a movement, mostly in the United States now, where psychologists literally, when they meet on their intake form, it'll say, should the issue of suicide arise, we will terminate therapy and make sure you're in contact with another professional because they don't want the liability. So increasingly, when there's tough standards and tough standard, people then act in their treatment as if everybody is a potential litigant. So they're always protecting themselves against something and treating folks not as, someone that might be very cool to encounter and work with, but someone who might get mad at me at some point. And so that's what the guidelines are. They're heading in that direction of people saying, oh, good, I know what to do. I know what to do.
I know what to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I
I
often,
don't know if that answered the question or if
well,
we
yeah,
wandered too far away.
I think it does,
Because
but
about wisdom, about
yeah,
mhm,
wisdom, and there's different views around fear and wisdom. Let's explore that for a sec.
uh-huh, uh-huh,
Some people say, um,
mhm,
so that could be a very fear-based, right? It's a deficit-based.
mhm,
It's a waiting for the greatest
mhm,
attack.
mhm,
It's waiting for an undermine,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
All those kinds of things.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Security-based, and then
Mhm.
other people say, well, wisdom is the power of guiding you to humility on the way to wisdom.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
What
can
do
you
I know?
give us a bit of a
Yeah,
rundown of maybe
yeah,
some relations with between fear and wisdom or something like that, humility, etc.?
yeah. Well, in part, I have embraced sort of aspects of existential, theory. And the main person for me, sorry, my computer thought I said Siri. It's okay, Siri, nothing. Yeah, the person I have embraced around that has been, of course, Ernest Becker in his book, Denial of Death. And what Becker says essentially in the denial of death is that we must create what he calls it a vital lie, a vital lie. And I've always said a convenient fiction. I have to believe something about myself and the world that gives me an agentic presence. We've touched on that a few minutes ago, a presence of an appreciative role and one where I have some agency. Right? And I'll grab hold of that because then the anxiety, fear, the basic fear of what's going to happen to me, where am I going to go, are these people going to kill me and eat me, whatever it is, see, all that tension around what was it, Sartre, I think, said hell is other people, right? This idea, how do I feel, where am I? So we then grab something, and it can be, from the left to the right. It can be embracing, political theory. It can be embracing fundamentalist religion. It can be like myself, which says, oh boy, do I feel like less scared when I don't believe anything. See, like when it's just, when it comes at me and I'm just going to watch what shows up, right? And those are ways that we kind of deceive ourselves in a very proper way. William James, in the early part of his life, in his diary, he was just absolutely driven to craziness around, do we have free will or are we determined? Determinism versus free will. Determinism versus free will. And he said, well, if I'm determined, if determinism, then nothing means anything anyway. I'm going to kill myself. And then the next day he'd say, no, I believe I have a hand in the game. And this went on and on. And the way he resolved it is a Becker way. He said, whether or not I have free will, I will choose to believe I do. And then away he went. See, the idea, we don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
like right now, there's a huge thing on determinism. I'm going to get Sam Harris, of course, being one of those guys. And who's the other one? Oh, he's huge on determinism. I did a podcast on him, but I don't remember his name now. But anyway, these are hugely deterministic individuals. They say we have very little boardage in our lives. And even James said that when someone asked, can you change your personality? And he said, the wheel will spin. The best you can do is take off some rough edges. But you are the wheel. Get the rough edges. See that idea. So uh, again, kind of going back to it, the essence is how can I go as you have promoted fearlessly into the world? what are the vehicles that will allow me to go fearlessly into as the extreme existentials will say, nihilism, nothingness, what will allow me to go into the creating something, being in an appreciative role in the world, whatever it is, right? And again, people can become fundamentalists in any particular religious faith. I used to say, well, the Hare Krishnas were no different than a lot of the evangelical free will churches, right? They both had ways of relating to their definition of an ultimate reality through emotional expression, emotional release, and that is better than fear, I guess. Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of the way I look at the idea of fear and anxiety
And just
as a
picking up,
fundamental.
yeah, thanks. And just
Mhm,
picking up on Becker's somewhat is,
mhm,
his book was called The Denial of Death. So he's not so concerned about the fear of death per se. He's concerned about how we fear the fear of death.
yeah.
And then we move into these denial dissociations from
Mhm, mhm,
not
mhm,
only the death process, but our own
mhm.
existential reality
Yeah,
as closely as we can get to, right? These ideas of authenticity and so on. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
And define what that means. Yeah, defining for ourselves what that means.
so I'd like to ask you a little bit about what do you come to in terms of understanding something beyond decisions that individuals make. So far we've kind of focused on a lot of self-psychology with some social context. Do you shift, let's say somebody compared to like Gaber Mate, who writes a book on the myth of normal, all about, illness and medicine and how it needs to change its paradigm. And he goes on and on about patriarchy. He goes on about, race. He goes on about all these things. How do you bring that into your practice over the years? And I know you also have a social work background. Probably that was pretty important. Shifting into the clinical world, more individualist psychology. How
Mhm,
do you
mhm.
kind of cope or deal with that? I'm curious.
Yeah.
Negotiate.
Well, I don't know how much I want to talk about Gabor Mate because I have some. Um, I did a podcast on it about some of his stuff, and but let me start in another direction. We may come back to him. Yeah, I had a master's degree in public policy, and public policy was sort of therapy for large systems. How do you craft ways and means to increase human satisfaction and contentment? How do we craft ways and means so people can feel more capable, realize capacities? This is a movement that's very powerful now in political philosophy, that societies that allow people to realize capabilities, capacities, are the ones that are the happiest. See, and these capabilities or capacities. I'm making some notes so I don't wander off too far. These capabilities and capacities have to do with things like every morning when I wake up, am I capable of drinking clean water? Am I capable of being able to walk safely on the street? Am I capable of acquiring objects that will sustain me and be part of my life? Am I capable of feeling protected? Am I capable of geographic, intellectual, social movement? Am I capable of feeling that I can realize certain aspirations? See, so societies that promote capabilities do better. And why did the Scandinavian countries come up every time? They're huge on that. See? Do I feel capable of being able to work at a level that allows me also to not work? See, and the Danes are famous for this, right? Tremendously productive people, 4 day a week work week, highly productive. Okay? Small country, do I feel capable of achievement, free education, and all the Scandinavian post-secondary I'm talking about. Okay? In Finland, they have the highest standard of education in the world. You know, what's his name? Uh, um, uh, the guy that did Columbine, Michael
More.
Moore. Michael Moore. I was going to, so Michael before me. It's the only Michael I can think of right now. Michael Moore he visited the Finnish education
I
system.
remember that, yeah, from the
It was
film.
beautiful. He sits down with 12th grade students. What are you going to be? I'm going to be a plumber, but I still speak three fucking languages. I mean, come on. I mean, it's just beautiful, right? Just this idea of I don't have to worry about, I don't acquire languages and become the head of the pep squad so I can go to Harvard. See, I know what I want to be, and I know there'll be enough reward associated with that that my society provides, that I'm capable of leisure, I'm capable of advancement, I'm all that kind of stuff. See, so those things are so important. Now,
So you're really not
again,
you're not really raising at this point, right, real political context like a critical theorist would, right? You're really into this capability, capacity. So
yeah,
again, just kind of tweak that a bit, how you
okay,
negotiate those edges.
yeah, and again, so
Equity, right? I mean, it's going to bring up equity issues.
yeah, and you hit the word. That's the very best word. I'll go into the political situation in the United States. The Democrats had two choices. See, they said, how will we show who we are? Oh, I know. Let's string the beads of these individuals on a thread of of and awareness. See, awareness of the suffering,
Mhm.
systemic racism, systemic sexism, systemic ableism. So we're going to string all these people and we're going to all do kumbaya and sing and talk about this. Because the other choice was we need to string equity of a different sort. This is why the Republicans went after the DEI. The DEI, when it only focuses on race, gender, sexual orientation, is missing the point. The string should be financial capability equity. See, because as soon as you string that, you got Bernie Sanders.
Nice.
See, you have Bernie Sanders is a socialist, but not he wouldn't be the president of the club because in socialism, the government owns all the means of production. Bernie Sanders says, no, no, no. We don't care who's producing. We just want their money. I listened to a Chinese intellectual and he said, hi, you guys are all mad at China. We didn't come and get your stuff. We didn't come and get it. You gave it to us. The 1% of your population said, produce this for us. They came here. And it was a wonderful experience for China. All of us rose. Also, our government distributed that in a very different way. Okay? We have better health, better housing, the roads are better, we're getting cars. So things rose in a way different. And then he said, now, of the 1% that made billions and billions from us, how much did you get? Saying to the Americans. So now they yell and scream at us that we stole your jobs. Now they yell and scream that we've ruined that it and my joke is, I said, that's akin to me standing outside of Safeway and saying, I spent thousands and thousands of dollars here. What have you given me? When do you come and buy something from me? Yeah. See, when do come and give me money back from something from me? When you go buy something, this is not a two-way street. When you send the means of production over there and desert people in the Rust Belt, people in previous, mechanized, all that kind of stuff. When there was a company in Iowa, they opened the maquiladoras across the border in Mexico, and they, sent all the work down there, and these factories shut down. Right? That wasn't them coming and taking it. They were just saying, hey, if you want us to do it, we'll do it. And then the 1%. So Bernie Sanders, so the Democrats had that choice, and Bernie Sanders is a step too far. So then they take a group of people and get them all angry. You don't have any jobs. You're not the millionaires you thought you could be because of this, 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 and this. And guess who's getting the money? That black person, that same-sex couple. See, so they strung it on this idea we're going to be, really loving and kind and aware and understand the systemic principle. Yes, the systemic stuff is there, but when you get equity on a larger sense that you've introduced here as a term, things change. Okay, so that's kind of my political sentiments, and in the stuff that I've been involved in, it goes back a long time. As I say, I look for good trouble. And let me give I'll give some historical ones and then maybe some contemporary ones. The historical ones were that in the in like I think 69, 70, um, I was running a free clinic, which is providing health care. A squirrel just fell off the roof here. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
I have a little balcony out here, and the squirrels just fell, and I went, "Oh, nice to see you."
A little
Uh,
bit of humbleness there for the squirrel for a moment.
yeah, well, it looks like it's one of the ones just out of the nest, and says, "Well, I guess I can't always trust that these, walls are
Yeah.
going to hold me." Anyway, uh, we were working with health for disenfranchised people, some street people, lots of hippies and things at that time, and then trying to get involved with the Black community more because we were sort of this white hippie street person clinic. And so we worked with the Black Panthers, and one of their missions was sickle cell anemia. And they said there must be awareness in the Black community of this disease that was completely underattended to. It had not been handled and not much had been done. So we jumped into that and we secured through a variety of funding a thing called the sickle deck so we could do screening. And public health's position on that was why should you tell someone something that we can't do anything about? In other words, let them live in their ignorance. Let them live and not know if they're a carrier, not know. See, if two carriers get together, you have a 50% chance of your next, if two kids, one of them's going to have it. So, anyway, but we went ahead and did that. Okay? We went ahead and did that over the protestation of public health. And they were not happy with this program doing this. And we had the director of public health for that area on our board. And he felt very slighted. He felt, I think we made this clear. You went ahead and did it. We said, yeah, it just seemed like a good thing to do. So kind of going forward with that. Again, going most recently, I did an intervention on the same-sex adoption case because Alberta, this was under Klein, so we're going back a little bit.
Yeah.
They had said people of same sex, one can be a parent, one can be a guardian. And if a heterosexual couple adopts a child or conceives one, they both are parents. So there were two couples, women, who had conceived children in their relationship, and the government said, no, one gets to be a parent, one gets to be. I interpret in the best sense that this has to do with benefits and all the, incorporating same-sex couples into benefit plans, and I just assumed it had to do with that. But we went ahead. Brian Eadie was the man who went to the Supreme Court for the turban. He's a professional friend, and I said, Brian, you want to go to the Supreme Court again? So we did this intervention where we were saying the basis to discriminate against same-sex couples is not found in any of the research. There is as much variation within as there is as between. There's more variation. So my thing was whether these women would be good parents or bad parents. See, I can't answer that question, but neither can you if it's based upon their sexual orientation. So we got involved. I got involved in that. I've taken on the psychedelic therapists a little bit because now this is huge. Oh, psychedelics. And so I published something online on their website or their blog, and the first part was, who gave you permission to use these medicines? An indigenous elder to a psychedelic therapist. Then went through the history of psychedelics. They go back to the 50s. I knew Oscar Janiger. Well, who's Oscar Janiger? He's a psychiatrist that gave LSD to Ronald Reagan, Elizabeth Taylor. I'll forget all the actors, but he was the actor's LSD guy in the 50s. He did these first treatment with LSD. I didn't know Stanislav Grof, but I knew his ex-wife, Joan Halifax, and knew of him and knew people that went down. And he was the next wave of psychedelics, right?
Yep.
Gabor Mate shows up and I'm just going to
Yep.
get going. And all of a sudden, ayahuasca! Oh, and then, and as soon as that was not enough bright light, sparkly, twinkly for him, he moves on. Sorry, I'm picking on him a little bit, but I'll also say some good things. So then there's ayahuasca, and then there's boom, boom, boom. So these things, they kind of move through. And I was of the first wave that went down to Oaxaca, to where the mushrooms are, right? And so we went down there, and Maria Sabina was the curandera, the shaman that was there. We didn't see her, and I don't know what her status was right then. But we went down, we did found a guy, shaman guy, and then we did mushrooms down there. 68, I think. Anyway, what she said later, though, was very powerful. She said, she called them the little birds, was one of the words she used. She goes, these give us the voice of the gods. These give us the voice of the gods. You know, she called them her little saints, her little santos. And she said, but now they're gone. The santos no longer will bring the voice of the gods because people have come and used them the wrong way, which I thought was really beautiful. Of course, you know, wearing the cloak of shame, because we were part of that generation. They just went down to get high,
Yep.
even though we did have some pretty cool mystical experiences through that, right? It was neat, but again, it's that idea. So I have made a run at the psychedelic folks a little bit, you know, to say, hang on, you have to understand there's certain traditions with this, and
Yep.
on and on.
Yep. Yep.
But anyway, I pulled Gabor Mate in because my concern about Gabor Mate, you know, from all I hear about him is that he's a really fine man and very decent, has great integrity, very caring. And yet at the same time, he kind of jumps from one sparkly, twinkly thing to another, because his latest has been, you know, oh, neurodiversity, right? I found out I'm ADHD, you know, that kind of stuff, right? And then because he's a good, bright guy, he can take that and run with it and write about it. The one that I didn't like was, I think he entitled "The Body Keeps Score." Was that it?
That
His
was somebody
book?
else, another author, but
Oh, that's Vander, whatever, yeah. But there's something he did one a similar thing, and he went into the idea of blaming the victim. That here's the mindset that relates to cancer. Here's a mindset that relates to. He even took on ALS. See, and then he did these anecdotal little stories about that. Well, that stuff goes back to the 60s, and the name of the original couple that did the cancer mindset stuff.
yeah. So, was it Simon
Yeah,
Tensor, the Simon Tensors?
yes, it was a Simon-Tins. That's right. And none of their stuff panned out. It never showed itself to be true. The anecdotes and the little clinical examples. And so when he went into that, but and I did a podcast on this. It was because my wife died of ALS, right?
Oh,
And
okay.
so he went into a elaborate thing about ALS. And so I made the statement in the podcast, I have a horse in this race. So
Yeah.
maybe, you know, listen to my stuff very carefully. And I said, this blaming the victim, that you don't think right. You don't have the right thoughts. You don't have this and that. Then I finished it with something very important. At that time, I was, oh, what was I, 70? You know, 70 something, maybe a little older. And I said, I have absolutely no medical conditions. I've been a world champion in my sport. I write, I publish, I'm alive, and I'm doing everything every single day. Gabor, come study me. If you're saying it's our mindset that lets us be the way we are, can't I be the poster boy? Can't you hang gold medals? Can't you put me on a gilded stage? Because then I can talk about the way I've lived and the things I've done, and you know, and all that. And I said, and by the way, that's all bullshit. I've been very lucky. I'm fortunate. Luck favors the prepared. My diet has been there. I've been my exercise, my all the things I have done to support my well-being. So I'm not saying it's because of, I'm not going to write the book. I'm 78 and I'm still the fastest man in my age category. See, but I'm not going to promote myself in that way. I had good luck. There was good fortune, good biology, good genetics, things that probably supported that.
Yeah.
But to then amplify that as a model of how you're supposed to be, that's crazy. That's an anecdote.
Yeah.
It's an
Very
anecdote.
interesting.
There could be 100 people that the same exact thing have done the same exact thing and they've died. So that's when I took him on. And I said, come, well, if you believe this, why aren't you here at my door?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, so
A lot of it, thank you for sharing all that.
yeah, yeah, it's a,
I see it as, again, very linked to something that we really started with the talk today, as we got a few minutes left here
yeah.
on, is, um, the idea of accepting folly as part of life is also accepting luck, and that's just the very thing you're speaking about to me. I see a very intense connection there.
Mhm.
And it's a nuanced luck, it's not simple. And then, that is part of wisdom. I mean, all of these connections. So, what has been one of the most humbling clinical experiences in the office that you can
Mhm.
remember? I mean, there's probably
Mhm.
been
Mhm.
lots.
Mhm.
Do you
Mhm.
remember one that just really, humbles you?
Mhm.
And I'll just
Mhm.
give the little story of the one that humbles me just off the top. It's at the daycare center 4 years ago or so, when I first walked in and started to work with 3 to 5 year olds, which I've never worked with other than I've
Mhm.
had children, but this is, 40
Mhm.
years later. I've always
Mhm.
been in adult education, teenagers or youth. And I walk in and I'm going to volunteer in this daycare center, and you just walk into the yard the first day, and all of a sudden kids start checking you out, right? And
Mhm.
you're a stranger, you have to go through all this experience, and then you do a little something with one kid, and then all of a sudden you got six of them surrounding you trying to grab your attention. And I just remember the humbling feeling was, why is it I am so capable and competent with adults, which I can be even in group therapy and complex
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
groups. I
Mhm.
have such capability, and I get with 6 or 7 of these little ones around me, pumping me and pulling my hat down over my eyes and just laughing. And I just go, these kids terrify me at some
Yeah,
level.
yeah,
I could
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
handle it, but when I came home, I said, I'm terrified. I don't want to ever go back again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, we'll kind of go into that a little bit and talk about it, you know. Um, uh, I've always said one of my superpowers, and I displayed it a little bit around the mate conversation, has been pouting. I have a pouty sort of presence, right? Like, well, who is he to talk that way, you know? See, so my superpower is to pout and sulk, and pouting and sulking has been a way for me to sometimes get points across, right? Um, uh, I'm trying to think of some examples where that takes place, but that's often somewhat retrospectively, it's embarrassing, or if you're humbled by it, right? I go, yeah, that's not the way that you ought to be, and not cope with things by going into sort of a pout. So that can be humbling. And in clinical work, the story I'll relate and then draw a parallel was that everybody looked at Milton Erickson, and they celebrated his brilliant sort of wise, foolishness, his foolish wiseness, and there's the stories about him. The one that I really liked was in Jay Haley's book, Strategic, and he said there was a man who came in who was very restricted, very shy, and he couldn't go out on dates. So Erickson arranges a date with another patient who was a divorcee in those days, a divorced woman. So this was the 50s, probably in going to the 60s. And he says, we're all going to dinner. So Erickson goes to dinner with these people together. But the guy said he gets embarrassed. He becomes flustered. He becomes tongue-tied. And he said, so he made a thing with the restaurant ahead of time. He'd set this whole thing up. So he brings in this absolutely, exciting, vivacious, hand jazz kind of woman. And this guy's, he's just overpowered. He's out of his element. He's feeling tense. He goes in. Erickson proceeds to make demands of the waiting staff, criticizes, makes the chef come out and explain things about the dinner. No, no, no. And what he was using was the psychological concept of implosion therapy. See, supersaturation, we say there's two ways: progressive desensitization or implosive, saturating experience. And then he relates how this, the guy was cured as a result, because he went, if I can live through that, all this other stuff I worry about is nothing.
Right.
And eventually, he dated this woman for a while, and everything went on. So the reason I'm bringing that up is that Of course, a lot of the stuff he did today would be intolerable
Yeah.
relative to ethics and principles and how we're supposed to behave. So the times for me that were the most, you know, humbling and kind of, shrugging afterwards is where my ambition kind of got the best of my motivation. Ambition is a desire to feel elevated, to feel recognized in one's own mind or in the minds of others. So this idea of, look how creative I am, look what a good little boy I am, look how good I can do this, and missing the receptivity of the patient. See that they weren't really receptive, and you know. A group of people would say, God, look how he put that together. That was so wonderful, so great. How'd it go? The patient never came back, meaning it'd be beguiling to you and to a small circle because they'd say, yeah, that integrated all sorts of really cool stuff, but it was the wrong treatment, for the right patient, you see, that kind of stuff. And so, events are things like um, the one that really is the most recent was I've stepped away from my forensic practice because another part of this was I did years and years of going to court and testifying regarding parental competencies, needs of children, dangerousness, all sorts of a pretty broad forensic practice. And my very last one, the office structure had changed. I was no longer the boss of the office. I turned it over and we weren't able to replicate through the support in the office, the testing. I had to figure ways to do that, and the front end wasn't, dedicated to me specifically, and so things were slipping. So I was, since feeling disoriented, and then my wife had died, and I had to go and testify within the shadow of that, and it was in COVID. So we were doing it on a screen. I'd never done that. And the man that usually would show up to testify didn't show up that day. And my testimony wasn't very strong. I won't go into a lot, but essentially they'd gone for a counter opinion. And the difference was a severe personality disorder versus post-concussive syndrome regarding the conduct of one of the participants. And they said, did you, we would like you to speak to X's report. I said, what report? I'd never heard of it. I'd never seen it. They said, oh, we sent it to your office. I said, I never saw it. And when I went afterwards to look for it, no one, it hadn't come in. And the front end, whether they'd said, can we send you this? And they didn't, I don't know. Okay. And so then they proceeded to try to cross-examine me on that report repeatedly. And I said, well, I can't speak to these things, right? Because they were trying to catch me on a neurological assessment over which I would have very little professional domain, and why that would be the thing the court should listen to. Anyway, in the end, I became more defensive, not quite as quirky and funny as I like to be able to be. And in the end, the judge said, well, I have to find, based upon the counter report, this is not a severe personality disorder. The person was experiencing post-concussive. Now, the reason this is all part of public record, by the way, I mean, it's there in the court record. The reason, though, that it was so humiliating is I've not had those experiences in court. I like court.
Yeah.
I book down, I study, I know my stuff, I know what's going to be there, and then I still to this day, I woke up this morning and reviewed uh, probably 10, 15 journals and looked at, and ironically, one of the articles that I filed to look at again was in the Journal of Psychopathology, and it said the concept of normal and how the DSM is based upon a term that is not yet operationally defined. See, it's not defined what normal is. That it is a shifting concept, and I'll get into that a little bit in a minute, maybe, that is a shifting concept that has to do with time, place, all the things, his culture, whatever is kind of it. So I'm always looking at that stuff. So when I go to court, I know my stuff. In that case, I didn't. This thing caught me by surprise. But the bottom line was, even though the court went with the post-concussive, the patient that was involved said, well, because you lost, I'm not going to pay you. they'd been in injunction through the lawyers, they would cover the court costs and split them. And the one said, because you lost, I'm not going to pay you. And I said, you've just paid me plenty. You just confirmed my diagnosis, a severe personality disorder. Okay, see, because that's exactly what a severe personality disorder would do.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, so I said, no, at least I feel good that I still got it, whether they see that I got it or not. So that was the most humiliating, most recent experience because I don't usually have that. Not that the court would always agree with me, but that at least my representation would not be one of defensiveness and crabbiness or whatever that I felt like I was that day. Also, as I stated, presenting to the first responders, I covered a lot of stuff that, like we're talking about grokking, that, you know, I use some quotes and things that I think they would find that doesn't make any difference to me. Just tell me what I need to do. Even though the person I presented with said, this was great. I love if you want to do it again. It's a young psychologist, and I often try to incorporate them into activities so that they will benefit and they'll get a call or something next time, whatever. So yeah. So then that was kind of, really I ought not do this. I got one more recently too. I went as a speaker for the Alberta Family Court group, and they wanted me to speak on a panel, and they were speaking about the changes. There's some new experimental stuff going around the family court, and we'd written an article that's been very well received on turning the family court into what we call a specialty court. Specialty courts there's a mental health court, there's an addiction court, there's First Nations courts. And in those courts, there's a whole different process from the standard Court of King's Bench or the regular family court, but to turn it into a specialty court. And there's a whole model we did, but I won't go into that. And they were celebrating how they spent this money, but they spent the money in the same way as they're already doing things. More treatment, more resources for kids, more resources for parents, right? And so there was a very illustrious judge on the panel, and I said, I look at all this stuff and it's good. But it's old wine in new bottles, and there's more bottles. We got more bottles now, and that's all to the good. But it is really questioning the very system that exists. And afterwards, I thought that was a pretty bold statement to make. Then the second was, and I actually went to the person afterwards and apologized. This woman says, well, there's so many things. Now they're looking at the neurological implications of adverse childhood events. And this was like for them, oh my God, this is amazing. The adverse childhood events and the neuro stuff and how we have to take care to protect. And this is part of their new movement. We're educating parents on this. Many of the parents I work with, there ain't gonna be any they're not gonna, oh my God, fall to their knees and give up fighting with each other over their kids. Oh, I've got to spare my children. That's exactly what I've been saying. He's been doing this. She's got to stop. And they're going to use that as ammunition to fight. Anyway, so she beaked up about the hyperbaric chambers now. They're using like Michael Jackson's chamber. You go in and you're in a high oxygen saturated. And they've been doing research in Israel with traumatic brain injury with soldiers. And she goes, well, there's this remarkable research that's coming out. And I thought, she's advocating for these parents to put their children in hyperbaric chambers, and that could catch on, and all of a sudden there'd be a cottage industry. There's lots of them. Google it. You'll find them there on the island. They're in Calgary, and you can just go in and use them. They'll charge you so much an hour. And so the research with those soldiers, they go in for 300 sessions.
Yeah.
300 days.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And there is some MRI evidence, right? But there's also MRI evidence coming out of working with traumatic brain injury by using ketamine and licking Sonoran toads. They have some MRI evidence. See what? And so I introduced that, and I said, there's evidence for this, because I wanted to say, I want these people taking notes. Oh, these children, well, to put them in hyperbaric chambers because the parents are fighting. We're going to spare them neuro. And anyway, so I said, and that was Michael Jackson's trip, and how did it turn out for him? So that was a horrible, aggressive statement around this woman who was cherry picking the literature, and she was a lawyer, and
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
so they give you this gift basket at the end. So I went over and I said, listen, I want to say I'm sorry, but I don't think that we should be promoting treatments at this point in time that have not borne the test of their efficacy relative to the populations we're dealing with. And she said, well, it was humiliating. You made me feel bad. And I didn't say it, but the part of me that's still 16 years old said, bitch, you fucking raised the subject. Don't raise it if you don't want to stand behind it. If you can't stand tall on it, don't blame me when it falls out. I mean, I don't that, you know.
I
And I
know,
said,
I
yeah.
know.
I said,
I got that part too, John.
yeah, you thought.
I
So,
totally
but
get it.
yeah, yeah, so I said, yeah, no, I am sorry. And I said, have my gift back. I don't want it. I said, well, then give it to someone else and, whatever. And I said, because I don't collect those things anymore. Anyway, so, but, that was humiliating to me to some extent. Don't be don't be so quick to put people in their place, even though they deserve to be put in that place. Find a different way. But I'm
And
not as
that
kumbaya as I
and
used to
thus
be.
there is the wisdom of Dr. Jon Amundson.
Mhm.
All the best. I'll put some links below for followers who want to follow more of John's work,
Mhm.
links to his articles.
Yeah.
I appreciate this conversation, John. We may have again, who knows, but I really appreciate your time.
So thank you. It's a pleasure. It's always fun.
Thank you.